Okay, so just a bit of context. This is my dad, Randy. Yeah, we're just gonna have a pretty, I think, free-ranging conversation here. But I was sort of filling you in on how the uh, the weekly practice
Saturday.
had gone. Yeah, and you said something about training wheels I really liked. So, and I'd like you
Yeah,
to, yeah, just say that again.
sure. So the way I see what you're doing now with with the Zoom meeting or anything else, like somebody else was talking about the hop on platform could be a better Zoom meeting or something. The way what I see is your your goal is to get a community wide conversation going where people can come in and join then your breakout rooms, and you come back to the plenary session and hopefully get these the breakout room ideas to percolate up and drive or inform the larger meeting. And so what I was saying is, if this technology stuff that you're getting going, the Zoom meetings and stuff, microphones, headsets, all that stuff to get this going, is like the training wheels of riding a bicycle. And I think that if you can get this to happen well, and of course, one of the other ladies said, yeah, she'd like get 8 billion people in on the call. Great, but let's start on a smaller scale. Let's maybe 100 people or something. If we can get this process to work, to where you start your plenary session, you go on your breakup rooms of smaller groups, elect a leader or a speaker, let's say, come back up. If that process can work, and when I say work, I mean we have to get the fringe people, and fringe is a bad word, or maybe not the best word, but people who maybe are rough on technology, rough on speaking skills, have naturally introverted personality, so they're not jumping to speak. And if we can get those people to somehow successfully participate and get their input as well, then it's working. And if we can then have people kind of set back after the session and say, wow, what just happened here? We're all a community was speaking, and we had this thing happen, and we can sit back and reflect on that. And then I think if we can have that work, then it's possible that we might be able to take the training wheels off the bicycle. And by that I mean take all this technology, the computers, the headphones, all the stuff, and set it aside and just think about that process, and it might start working on a super conscious level.
Mm.
And I think that's a fantastic thing, that what you're doing now, we're learning to ride a bicycle with training wheels, with the hope that we can set all this technology aside, take the training wheels off, and have 8 billion of us communicating on a super conscious level. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and for me, part of the training wheels too is like within the, well, there's like different levels of training wheels because this Saturday we tried to we suggested a particular culture. I told you some of that with like the direct response thing. There were other
Yeah,
things like we just told people, for example, that when you're in the breakout rooms versus the plenary, it's a different context. So if you're speaking in the plenary, just keep in mind that the cost of you speaking is many people are now becoming passive listeners. That doesn't mean don't speak. It just means really keep an eye on conciseness. So, and then, like
right.
try to keep it to one point, try not to list points. And we tried to set that culture, but, um, especially me and Ariel and people who are sort of more active in the organizing of it, which we're trying to keep very open, but I think a lot of people just don't have the time or interest to really get involved. But for the people who are involved in the organization, I think the framing is becoming more like, what structure can we put around it so that we can practice this better? What structures and cultures can we kind of rely on and lean against so that the conversation within that is more free? But that those structures can become, I mean, earlier in the week, but when we were just starting to try to plan yesterday's practice, um, we started talking in terms of rules, and even with throughout the week that turned into, wait, more, let's actually do guidelines. We found more and more guidelines rather than rules, that made it that got to the same ends. And so for me, another way of sort of slowly removing the training wheels is that we will all get better at certain skills, such as speaking clearly and concisely. Sometimes some people, when they speak, they kind of mumble. Some people, when they speak, they say their point, but then they seem to kind of reiterate it when they don't really need to, you know?
Right.
Some people aren't bold enough, you know. Some people, they stop speaking too soon because they get nervous, and those kinds of skills we'll get better at. We'll also be getting better at the feedback in that situation. So if somebody's carrying on, well, you mentioned that one guy started speaking an anecdote in the recorded. Uh, when the last part of our first practice was recorded, and you'd watched that, and you said you noted at the one point where an older guy was giving an anecdote, and I tried to sort of, I suppose, correct that and say, let's try to speak for the groups that we had, and then he kind of carried on. And you know, maybe a skill that I and others could grow is like, how do you, you know, maybe shut that down a bit more firmly, but then also on the other side of that question, how do you do it gently? And more generally, you know, if I feel like someone could use maybe some advice at any part of the process, whether it's in a breakout room or a plenary, um, there's a lot of questions and a lot of learning we'll have to do. Do I bring it up right in the moment, or do I note their name and talk to them about it later? Um, and then just another example of these questions, there's so many questions, is like, when we are analyzing the sessions, is it bad form to mention people by name? You know, if I want to say, like, I hope there's no Johns in the group, because I'm going to use that name as an example. But if I want to say, like, if let's say that John was carrying on, and he does that a lot, and maybe he dominates the conversation a lot, you know, how should I view talking about John to the community, especially given that a lot of this is transparent? You know, I certainly don't want John to feel like I'm talking behind his back. So, but I also think that gossip is actually a pretty functionally important thing that humans do. So anyway, that's just a bunch of questions, and we'll have to learn, and we'll have to have training wheels. Um, and I guess I think we're all eager to get the training wheels off. And I also think that the training wheels can look, I understand how when we, sort of the organizationally active people, try to put on training wheels, people might look at that and go, hey, we're not here to be controlled. You know, there's kind of that pushback to some degree. So yeah, lots to balance being an appropriate word here with the metaphor.
Well, yeah, and you know, again, the metaphor of riding a bike, or we have to say learning to ride a bike. This is a brand new bike,
Yeah.
and so you know, nobody's an expert at riding this bike yet. You, Ariel, nobody's an expert at it.
Yeah.
And you know, then the list goes down further to the fringe of people who, you know, aren't used to technology, aren't a good speaker, have an introverted character, you know. So everybody's learning, and you know, the sort of the really aggressive, extrovert, loud, confident speaker who wants to he has to learn too, and some of those are going to be a little bit of a slap on the hand, and there's going to be some stinging involved. Uh, you know, well, you know, back to riding a bike, you're going to skin your knee a couple of times, and that's learning to ride a bike. So, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
so it's a learning process, and it's a brand new bike. This is a bicycle that's never been seen in the world before. So,
Hmm.
you know, it's way different than riding a bike. Nowadays, you can have somebody else who knows how to ride a bike teach you how to ride a bike. You
Exactly.
guys are like, oh, you know, no one's ever seen one before.
Yeah.
You know, there's going to be some skin knees out of this process. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. And there's not even a guarantee that we'll be able to ride the bike, right? Like, we're hoping.
well, yeah, that's true. And the mic might be, or the bicycle might be have to be completely torn apart and reassembled into something that doesn't look like a
Yeah.
bike, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's a hell of an adventure. My hat's off to you, everybody involved on your team of trying to get this global communication thing up and going. It's a fantastic idea, and it's sorely needed. And you know. The environment that we're in now, especially here in the States. I'm in the States, and you know, our social unrest from, you know, a bunch of different angles, you know, income equality, dysfunctional democracy, and of course the whole racial thing that is really a smoldering fuse right now that I don't
Mm.
know if you guys caught the news globally, but we just had a young person found hanging dead in a tree in Arizona. And the question is, was it a suicide or was it a hate crime? And that
Damn.
question is still unresolved. It was an extremely public place. And, the voice coming from the suicide community is that, well, people don't do suicides in a public place where they could be easily rescued. Well, that's
Mm,
not 100%. Those cases have happened as a statement. I'm going to hang myself in the public square kind of a thing. But, nobody wants to jump to conclusions, but it certainly looks like a freaking hate crime. It
yeah.
looks like this young man was lynched in 2020 of Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't want to get into that. I beat myself up, or I get on Reddit every day and I look for that stuff. Not that I'm trying to find it, but I want to be aware of it. And some days I just slog out of here, just beat up from the news.
Yeah.
So let's not dive into that too much unless you want to. But yeah,
Well,
today's climate, we need this global communication now worse than ever, it seems
yeah.
to me. So
Well, I actually think it would be good to get into because, and I haven't actually mentioned this part of it to you yet, but on yesterday's practice, by the way, we decided not to record the end, so there won't be any like footage from that. I think there was like enough pushback to where I just said, okay, let's just not do it, and we can redecide next time. But there was in it didn't come up on the first practice, but this practice, the race topic came up. And I guess just to like my personal experience has been I really don't pay attention to the news at all. And so just in the past week or so, suddenly I started hearing, well, first I just noticed like, oh, this Black Lives Matter thing started to get this feeling that that's not the Black Lives Matter hashtag I knew 2 weeks ago. There's something different going on. And then I started hearing from people like, this is getting really intense. And it's interesting. I'm in South Africa where there's more racial tension, but it's almost like people are more used to it, so it's not exploding in any way. It's just like the same old whatever. Yeah, racial tension. Yeah. But in the States, it's like becoming a huge thing. Did you see Dave Chappelle's quick it was like an improv type thing that he did?
well, he did 8 minutes and 46
Yes,
seconds
that's the one. Yeah,
yeah, right. I did see that. Yeah, and very powerful. I appreciate the fact that he called out Candace Owens, who I would agree with 100%. She is a dumb bitch. You should somehow silence her without censoring and silencing people. I'm
yeah,
not into that. But
yeah.
good Lord, we need to deplatform that crazy bitch. Uh, you know, what a mouthpiece for the right. Jesus Christ. Yeah, I mean, that's propaganda with a capital fucking P. But
Yeah,
yeah, I anyway, you know,
it's a powder
another.
keg. That's how it feels to me.
Yeah. Well, in the Black Lives Matter, there's a couple of things that they need to fix, I think, to or not. Maybe but one of them is there was, I guess, been a couple of Reddit AMAs where the leader or director or president of whatever of Black Lives Matter was questioned specifically on where do the funds go, and they completely dodged the question.
Mm,
That's troubling. That needs to be transparent, and we need to see that those monies are going where they're supposed to be going. Who's driving the Cadillacs? Well, there might be some hard questions there.
yeah,
Uh, if that money's being misappropriated, I don't know. But they dodged the question. Now I'm concerned.
yeah.
The other thing I just watched was there's a black musician named Daryl Davis, and he is becoming quite well known for having initiated conversations with white supremacists. I don't know how to say the word. I don't even want to know, but KKK and Nazis and those kinds of guys. And he has actually befriended these people, and he has a track record of now over 200 of these individuals who have renounced their affiliation with these hate groups, donated to him their robes and their memorabilia, stuff like that. And I think he's just doing a fantastic job of sitting down with people on the other side and saying, hey, let's just have a conversation. Now, these things don't happen overnight. The grand wizard of the KKK took him 2 years of conversations in each other's homes back and forth. And when they first met, the KKK showed up with an armed bodyguard.
My goodness.
Well, Yeah, so he has a kind of a funny story to talk about that, where ice in a bucket that was off the side settled, made a noise, and everybody jumped up like, ah, oh, calm down, calm down. You know,
It was just
they
the ice.
almost went to shooting each other because ice in a bucket shifted.
Yeah.
He's got a funny story about that, and he's done a TED talk where he talks about that story. Anyway, you look up Daryl Davis, black musician, and he's doing fantastic. Anyway, he sat down with these two young black men from Black Lives Matter, and it was cats and dogs fighting and hissing at each other. The
Mm,
two black men accused him of being a sellout, that he's doing the wrong thing. He's not helping Black Lives Matter. And of course, Daryl is a very highly educated man in general, and specifically on race and KKK and these things. And he knows what he's talking about. These two young, I hate to say it, but hood thugs, they were completely ignorant on these same topics. And if they were representing Black Lives Matter, they were way too stupid to be representing any organization on the topic. And they just, those two young men eventually kind of threw down their disgust and stormed out of the meeting.
mm,
And then another senior guy came in from Black Lives Matter, and same thing, scolded Daryl Davis for bringing in the wrong attitude and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm thinking, well, uh, if that's a true representation of Black Lives Matter, they are on the wrong dial. They're making a mistake. I don't know.
mm.
I don't know. And anytime this stuff flares up, there are people and organizations who see this as an opportunity to, promote the wrong agenda. And I, I, I want something like Black Lives Matter to succeed.
Yeah.
I'm not sure Black Lives Matter is that. So,
Right.
uh, you
Right.
know, too soon to tell. But right now, it kind of does not look very good, in my
Yep.
humble opinion. So,
Yeah.
I think Daryl Davis is doing fantastic work, and a fantastic track record. I mean, he's out there doing it, and I think, doing the right thing. He's talking to people that are on the other side, and he's got a track record of 200 conversions of people
Yep.
who are, grand wizards in the KKK and shit. Now, come on, that's a pretty entrenched person. If he can get them to donate their shit to him for a trophy that he won them over, man, you've got to respect that.
Yeah.
So these two knuckleheads that stormed out of Daryl Davis's meeting, boy, that's a bad sign. I don't know.
Yeah. I understand. Yeah, and I want to like share a similar feeling, but first I want to say that like knowing we're recording this and I'm going to put it on my YouTube channel, I know that there's going to be pushback, and that's what's weird. That's what's off-putting to me about this is that it's so unacceptable to the movement to be against the movement. It's like if you're not with us, you're against us, kind of thing, um, and which is kind of leads me to what I wanted to say, which is in the weekly practice there was so I'm going to be pretty free with my language here. So prepare to be possibly offended if you are woke. So this is the term that I've have you heard the term woke used, by the way?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so it's been popping up, and it's a pretty, I would say, kind of not. It's kind of derisive way to talk about, let's say, like social justice warriors or people on the left. Um, Derisive, I think, is a bit too strong, but it's more like it's like writing them off. Oh, they're pretty woke, and you get kind of like it's almost a
No,
joke. And
I agree with that assessment. Woke, yeah.
yeah,
The woke people can be kind of arrogant and aggressive in their
yeah,
agenda and not willing to listen, not open-minded. Though, so that's the
not
woke thing. That, yeah. Go ahead.
not willing to listen is exactly it, actually. And I'm glad you brought that up, because so in the call, I would say what I noticed is that there were two people that I would say loosely classify as woke. One was, I would say, militantly woke, and that was somebody that was in a breakout room with me, and she and we were all trying very hard to in these breakout rooms be very authentic. There's this term authentic relating, which is related to dialogos, which I've talked to you about, and it's this emerging community which is very focused on having a particular kind of conversation with small groups of people. Um,
Listening.
Starting with listening, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And being present is sort of another thing in there too. So we're in
Yeah.
that space, and then she said something, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something along the lines of um, this group is too white, and there needs to be more non-white participants. You know, this needs to be more diverse. That was sort of her thing. And she said, and so, um, and I don't remember what our response was, but it wasn't exactly encouraging of what she said. You know, we were all trying to be very, well, there certainly wasn't any like let's say triggering, you know, aggressive or defensive responses, but but the way we responded, well, as I said, I don't remember how we responded. I know from my perspective, I probably just didn't really engage with it much, you know, and if I said anything, it would have been something like, "Oh, okay, I understand what you're saying," something like that. But
Yeah.
it wasn't. But then when she spoke next, it became clear that that was sort of an unacceptable response to her, and she said something like, "Oh, I didn't realize this group was not going to be inclusive, and if that's how it is, I'm probably not going to show up next practice." So, and that thinking about it later and then talking about it in the plenary, she was sort of holding the conversation hostage. She was essentially saying, "Look, if we don't talk about what I think is important, then this conversation is not worth my time." That's fair enough to say, but it didn't sit right with me that she would say it there. You know, we're really trying to listen to each other deeply, and what she said is, if we don't talk about this, because we were listening to her, right? That was already happening. And I feel very comfortable
Yeah.
saying that. It was a real, honest spirit of listening, but that was not actually enough for her. What she wanted and what she felt was unacceptable that she didn't get was agreement. That's how it seemed to me. Maybe I'm, you know, now I'm sort of, you know, trying to analyze a situation, so there might be sort of, you know, my own biases showing up here. But it seemed to me that that's what really bothered her. And then in the plenary, I would say that there was somebody who was, I'm going to have a chat with her, actually, a direct chat off the record here later this week. I'm really looking forward to it. And I would say that I don't want to say she is woke. I think she is with a lot of the woke movement stuff, at least. And she really believes in it, you know. Um, and the militant woke person didn't really speak up much in the plenary. This other person spoke up more. And she said, "I feel like when I bring this stuff up, I speak to a brick wall, and it almost seems like there's a rule where we don't talk about that stuff." And then I eventually responded to that with a direct response, and I said, "Well, I feel like I'm part of the brick wall that you are noticing, and for me, my silence is because it was really hard for me to put to words, actually, but I just tried to stay relaxed and stay honest, and I just said, like, it's such a dangerous topic that I find all I can really do is tiptoe towards it." And then later there was aired more of, I didn't say this, but somebody else sort of aired more of, like, there's a feeling like I'm about to get lectured, and then I shut down, and that's also part of the silent response. Um, Give me just a second. Someone's calling me. I'm just going to take that real quick. So I don't remember exactly where I was.
I think the more reasonable of the two was talking about a brick wall, and you were saying you felt part of
Oh
the
yeah,
brick wall.
yeah, and part of what later emerged from the conversation is, like, there's this threat of being lectured, and then the person who is not really ready to talk about that, let's say, is less ready to talk about it. And so now, and so then from that point, the conversation, well, first of all, the energy got shot way up, not in a very pleasant way, for me anyway. I think everyone got way more tense, and then the race topic was with us the rest of the evening, actually, all the way up until it was only me and Ariel and David talking, which is we're sort of three that like to get together and try to organize a lot of this.
Yeah.
So
I know David
until
from your videos. Yeah.
oh right, yeah, yeah. So so what is the point I'm trying to make here? Well, so now um, we have to, before next Saturday, make a decision of, well, let me put it this way. Some people, Ariel included currently, think that we would be wise, or that we should um, uh, include sort of a part, like a part where we talk about race. If not where everyone talks about race, maybe where some of the breakouts talk about race. I'm currently of the opinion that okay, what we know is that there was a lot of energy around it. In fact, when during that moment, Ariel asked, like, hey, um, if it seems like there's a lot of energy. Is there a lot of energy? And a lot of people did this, which is a sign language we've sort of come up with, which is like, I resonate with that, or I agree. So I would say 70% of the room like did this. And I was one of them. I did it reluctantly because I didn't want to feed into the conversation, but I had to say, well, yes, there's very high energy. So I went like that. So we know that. And then I think from that, it's easy to conclude, well, we need to talk about this next group. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I'm not sold. And I also really want to keep pointing out, bringing up in this conversation, that we have not yet chosen even one topic that is important to us, except for what are we even doing, and how do we do this? Like, there's so many things that we haven't even really decided for sure that Dialogos is like a core part of what we're doing, even though I suspect there's a lot of support for it. But even that is not yet set. And yet now suddenly there's this prospect of like, oh, we need to reserve time for the race conversation. And it makes me really nervous. And part of my reaction is like, okay, what we're doing is we're holding this open space, and this open space is built from listening. There's all these ideas. I imagine that we're like, it's like a tree of apples, and there's ideas, and you can go pick these apples, and taste them and talk about them. And it seems like what is now happening to me is that the race thing is demanding that this is now the conversation. No more open space. Of course, that's not what it's saying. What it's saying is this is the conversation. And the consequence is that, well, there goes the open space. There's no longer an open space where any idea is free to float in and out. Now it's about race. And the problem there, that goes as one of the people was saying, like, that goes really deep. And we kind of can't, to some degree, we can't really, I have trouble with assuming that everyone's a little racist, but there is a truth to it in that we all come from an evolutionary past where it's advantageous to be suspicious of others. And if you see someone of a different skin color, it's evolutionary advantageous to be extremely tense about that and really worry about that. So that's in our history. And, that was not long ago in terms of evolutionary history. And so then to take this conversation, which the lovely part is the open space, and then bring it right to this really difficult thing where okay, I'm a white guy. Part of the conversation then becomes, is that bad? Like, do I have some original sin inside of me? And am I racist? I mean, God, those are so difficult to discuss, you know? And then so that was the whole conversation, and some of the response to that was like, well, okay, we should talk about it because it's hard, and that I'm not sold on either. If it's hard, we should pay attention to it, and in our personal lives, maybe we should pay attention particularly to the things that scare us. But at such a young, vulnerable state, we're like a baby, and I would not encourage a baby to follow pain. A baby, it's their job should be to avoid pain. You know what I mean? Because it barely knows what it is. It's bumbling around. It could fall off a cliff. Anyway, so that's gonna have to be part of the discussion in the following week. You know, how do we handle this race thing? Do we set aside time for it? How do we avoid, it's like there's this black hole that shows up whenever race comes up. You start by talking about, should we talk about race? Then you get pulled into this black hole. And then you're talking more and more about race. You're talking more and more about how the white people are doing something wrong or the black people are doing something wrong. That's an ugly fucking discussion. I don't think anyone wants to be in the center of that black hole. But the problem is, as soon as you start getting close, it's like, that's where everybody goes. And people, the conversation quality, the energy goes up, and people are eager to speak not because they're watching something beautiful emerge and they want to help it emerge and talk about it, but because they feel something is, it's like they feel threatened. So anyway, that's a tirade about how race has now, I feel like it's knocking at the door, this race conversation. And I want to be careful with how I say this because I have this leadership role, but I feel like we need to hold this space against the conversation, not to keep it out, like not to ignore it, but to not let it pop the bubble, you know, destroy what we've created, and at least be conscious of how we're letting it in and why we're letting it in. And if we want to talk about it for fucking 5 weeks straight, I have no problem with that in principle, but I don't want to, um, I don't, I just want to make sure we're doing it for the right reasons and with the right framing.
Well, let me jump in a couple points there. First of all, I'm 65 years old, so I've been knocked around for a long time. Uh, I've, of course, I grew up in a town that had no black people. When I was growing up as a child, there was not a black person within a million miles, mentally.
Mm.
And so, that's not reality, but that's my childhood. And then, and some of my relatives actually have passed away now. I had an uncle who was pretty racist. I gave him a little bit of I got a free card or something on that because he was a janitor in a high school during the 60s when the race wars were exploding and black people were, you know, setting fire to stuff. And so the kids were tearing up the school he was trying to keep put together. And it was an army against him, So from a janitor trying to keep a school put together during the 60s, that was how could you not come out of that and hate black people? I mean, I don't know. But on the other hand, I've recently, 35 years in Alaska, and I've recently returned to Iowa, Illinois, the Midwest, and the subtle racism here is shocking. I'm just blown away by, God, it's 2020. What are you fucking talking about? I'm blown away by it. It's totally surprising to me that crackerheads are acting like this. What are we talking about? Come on. Do you even know any black people? Fuck. And of course, then, I was in the Army in the late 70s. And so it was strictly voluntary. You might say there was an economic draft going on, the same as now. People want to go to college, join the military. Well, okay, so that's an economic draft. That's a great term. That's exactly what it is. Anyway, lots of black, lots of Hispanics. And so I was, thrown into this extremely diverse. Whites were damn near a minority in that situation, and the beautiful result is I got to know some Hispanics, some Puerto Ricans, and some blacks personally by name. Sat down and smoked a lot of premium hash and drank a lot of beers with these people, and got to know them individually. And gosh, guess what? Just like whites, there's some really beautiful people and there's some ignorant shits that should have never been born. What the fuck? Yeah. So, color of skin has nothing to do with that spectrum. And so back to Daryl Davis, he's doing a beautiful thing by talking to these people. Just sit down and talk with them, share them. Pretty soon, oh my gosh, this is another human being just like me. They have the same fears and worries and hangups and quirks, and some of them are assholes and some are beautiful. So anyway, back to your, I guess, your dilemma of starting this new conversation, and now the race thing has popped up. I've come to notice that now, again, 65 years old, I can operate my life completely for periods of time and not be faced with the race issue. Okay. It is a white man's world, and I'm white, and I can operate in it and never see race card pulled. Certainly not against me. I don't get barred from anything because I'm white. That never happens. Um, I think white privilege, it probably happens a lot, and I'm not even aware of it. I got the whatever because I'm white, and it's just my life's history, and I can't see it because it's always been there.
Mm,
If I get pulled over by the police, I'm not worried about being shot.
mm,
You know,
mm,
if I get pulled over by the police, I can be kind of lippy about it. And hey, what the fuck you doing? I'm blah 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 blah, and I kind of get on my little rant about that. I can be a bit of an asshole to cops when I don't think I've done anything wrong.
mm.
Well, a black man pulled that shit and he's shot dead without blah blah blah. So I've never experienced that gut level fear of being pulled over by a cop. I can't even imagine. And when I sit back and think about it, one of my neighbors here where I'm living now is black. He's the same age as me, basically, and I want to get to talk with him one of these days. But when I look at him and see his age on him, and I think, what kind of horrific shit has he had to put up with in his life? Just because of his goddamn skin color. And so I guess where I'm getting at is that the race thing is part of our world today. And the fact that it has sort of, started pounding on the door of what you're trying to create here, not surprising at all.
Mm.
How you're going to handle that and continue to do what you're doing without it being overtaken by the race conversation. And yet on the other hand, the race conversation needs to be happening,
Right.
Again, I've never had race. My whiteness has never been used against me, only an advantage. And sometimes I'm probably not aware of that. The white privilege, just happens. I don't even know it.
Mm.
So I guess where I'm at is that people of color, everybody but whites, and we can even include, let's for crying out, let's include indigenous peoples around the world. There's now Astoria in Canada, which I always had a very, very high opinion of Canada. Well, now they're treating their indigenous peoples pretty rough.
Mm.
I guess there's a term now called the Starlight Tour, where Canadian police would take inebriated First Nations people out into the wilderness and drop them off, and they'd freeze to death.
Jesus.
Called a Starlight Tour. It's a thing.
Wow.
And this is in Canada. I'm like, what the flying fuck? The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Dudley Do Rights, the whole idealistic vision I had of Canada. They're polite, they apologize for everything, and then to hear this coming out, and it's actually got an agreed upon term. Oh, that's what happened. A Starlight Tour. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Holy shit. So, when we expand the conversation to include, whites on one side with a manifest destiny and, bulldozing everybody out of the way to, extract resources and make money and install our democracy with a gun. I have a very poor opinion of the United States democracy process because, no wonder they want to install it around the world, because it's very easy to buy and control. And, it's a shitty system. Wow. It needs to be torn down and rebuilt. I don't think you can fix it. I think it needs to be set aside, something else put in its place.
Mm.
And when set aside, I mean, well, that might entail some explosions.
Mm.
They're not going to just let us set them aside.
Yeah.
You have to fight for that.
Yeah.
And anyway, so the race thing, it's here, and it is probably going to dominate some other things that really don't have anything to do with race. Your project is a prime example. You didn't start this talk about race, but race is certainly one of the topics you don't want to exclude. Yeah, let's talk about race, but oh my God,
Right.
it could overwhelm and completely dominate what you're trying to do and other things as well. Um, and in some respects, I think it's time. It
Mm,
needs to be. It needs to be at the forefront of people's consciousness. Again, I'm 65 years old and white. I can operate my life without looking at race at all.
yeah.
And other people, it is a huge part of their every breath they take. Is the fact that they're a person of color, and if they get a little bit lippy, or the term is uppity, they can be shot dead. Well,
Yeah.
goddamn.
Yeah.
Um, so here we are.
Here we are.
It's 2020, and race is still a thing.
Yeah. 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 I guess I feel more ready to have that conversation just from this conversation. Um, hmm. I'm just now I'm ready enough to actually imagine it and think about what would that mean for next Saturday. And I think, well, I think we still have to think collectively. You know, me and when I suppose when I say the organizers, sometimes I mean the three, me, David, and Ariel. I also sort of mean anyone who joins me, because throughout the week I would have calls with people, and um, I think we still need to decide. Well, let me put it this way. I'm more convinced, I'm not yet convinced, just personally, I'm not trying to be a dictator here, but I'm not yet convinced that I would choose to dedicate time to it. At the same time now, after hearing you speak, uh, I'm now thinking, well, I find myself imagining how would we do it, and I find myself more ready. This last weekend we had 3 20-minute breakouts, and one of the feedbacks was like, those always end too soon. Let's rather do fewer, longer ones. And so, yeah, I'm thinking if we did like a 40-minute breakout session where you're with people who are willing to authentically communicate. It's bonkers how well this works, by the way. I'd love for you to join for the next one if we can. Although I don't think the timing works out. But anyway, if it ever does, that would be really cool. But we'll talk about that later. But uh, where was I getting? Yeah, it's amazing how well these breakout rooms work generally. Even with the race thing, it didn't really break down. I only kind of regret how the plenary went. Anyway, so that's, I guess, just to summarize, I find myself more ready personally to kind of support saying like, okay, well, this came up, and we don't yet know how to ride this bicycle, so this might be a really rough ride. We got a big downhill to go, and we don't know how to ride the bicycle quite yet. We might break some limbs. We might. I think maybe that's kind of the point I want to make to this group as I'm thinking through it. Is like, jumping into this topic could really do more than bruise us. I mean, conceivably, I don't know, I don't really think this would happen, but conceivably it could break us. Conceivably, it could be such a disaster that like less than half the people show up next call and it kind of fizzles out. I kind of don't really see that happening, but it could really kind of leave some wounds that we kind of then have to tend to for a few weeks. um, just because it's such a challenging trail on this bike, you know. uh,
Yeah, I'd say the trail is certainly challenging. Yeah, to the point of you got logs and boulders that are bigger than your bicycle.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
I don't want to. Well, it occurred to me, and so I guess I'll just throw this out here. The other thing that occurs to me on the issue of race inequality, and let me say it exactly like that: race inequality. And I sincerely believe that we are being manipulated by the rich elites. And what I mean by that is that they are orchestrating and manipulating and stirring up this strife between people based on their skin color to divert us from the reality of income and income equality. And that's why I say race inequality.
Hmm.
But I think income equality is by far the larger issue. You know, when we have 1% of the population controlling 30 or 40% of the wealth of blah, 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 that whole story. And I think that I don't want to diminish the race conversation because Black people are being shot, killed, dead for, you know, anyway. Yes, we got to have that conversation. We got to somehow fix that. We got to rein in our militarized, psychopathic cops that are, you know, killing people with immunity. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't know. I don't know why somebody hasn't just showed up to one of these meetings with a machine gun and start mowing down cops. I don't know why that has not happened yet. The
Well,
thought has occurred.
part of Dave Chappelle's point is that it is happening to some degree. You know, he says he was citing a few examples of where there had been a backlash. There was yeah, a black cop who who saw that his white partner use unnecessary force, and when he tried to report it to the system, he got fired. Like he tried to go through the system and say, "This is we need to shape up a bit," and then he was fired. Tried a bunch of legal processes to get reinstated, and none of it worked. And then he went rogue and he said, "Like I'm going to do some asymmetrical warfare." Cold-blooded, killed two cops in their car, and then and I don't know if he killed more, but oh yeah, he went and killed one of the cops' daughters because he said in his letter, "I'm going to do asymmetrical warfare to the cops and their families." It's like that's fucking intense. And then yeah, and then it turned out, and then later they found him and they found where he was, and they showed up with 200 cops to riddle that bastard with holes. Is essentially the
Yeah, Swiss cheesed him is what, yeah,
Swiss
Dave
cheese
Chappelle
him. That
said.
was the
Yeah, and they did. Yeah, he had holed up in a cabin and they found him and uh, they reduced the cabin to splinters, you know, and he
yeah,
was in it. So you can imagine what they recovered
yeah,
from that scene.
yeah,
Um, yeah, you know, this whole, but you know, I think there's a couple other things. So the income equality. I think another thing that might be part of the problem is I think it's possible that we have come to the end the end of our sustainability trail, and I
mm,
think it's possible that what we are experiencing and is being pretty well hidden so far is the fact that we are running out of resources.
mm,
And I think it's quite possible that that is part of the problem. And, you know, we hear about sustainability so much that it's now just background noise. We don't even register what that word means anymore.
yeah,
But what it means is that we're going to run out of food and clean water. And that is inevitable.
mm,
I hate to see that, but that day is on its way. And it could be so close that we're starting to feel the pinch of it now with
mm,
our grocery stores being out of food and it's being blamed on a flu pandemic
mm,
with a very, very low mortality rate. And okay, I don't want to get into that too much, but um, it's possible that our unsustainable lifestyle here in the West, which I mean, you know, from Britain and Europe and America and Canada and, you know, even
mm.
Australia, New Zealand, we can't be buying new refrigerators and cars every year because we're bored with the color.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
uh,
Well,
the rest of the world is becoming woke, if you want to use that word. The
hmm,
rest of the world is saying, "Hey, excuse me, but what the fuck?
yeah,
You know, you come in here and you mine my mountain down that I was living on, and you're polluting the ocean that we all have to fish out of, and you know." Anyway, I think that well, the shit's starting to hit the fan in many ways. Income
yeah,
equality, resource extraction with the gun. You know, it only works so long, and
yep,
we might be at that door right now today. It might be starting to crack open, and the flood might be coming in, and it's going to get painful and ugly. And
Yeah.
that day absolutely is coming. I mean, it is unavoidable. We are Our population growth is escalating, and there's a tipping point, brothers and sisters, and you know, it is inevitable. The only question is, are we there now, or is it tomorrow?
Yeah. Um, yeah. Well, so I want to push back on part of that, but I want to sort of agree with your bigger point. Um, I I don't necessarily agree that we're at like a raw resource capacity, that we're nearing exhaustion in that way. Um, but I do. Well, there's this term meta crisis that's people are starting to use, well, at least in sort of this circle, especially the community I'm trying to form, which comes from Rebel Wisdom, and there's actually quite a few communities popping up. It's actually very cool network kind of decentralized thing, which is a whole other topic we can get into. But just to stay on what you were saying, so I think I think, and others are saying that we're entering a meta crisis, and one of the uh, one of the facts about this meta crisis is it's not just one thing. It's an economy thing. It's a race thing. It's a medical uh, um, infrastructure stability thing. It's like a food uh, supply chain thing, and possibly also a food resources thing. On the food resources, it's not that I'm saying I disagree. I'm just saying I don't really see that. But I mean, I wouldn't be shocked either, you know. And I think also when you talk about food crisis and food and supply chains together, I'm actually way more on board already with sort of what you're saying, because the supply chains relies on the economy, which and 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 I think what we're going to look back and conclude is that COVID was a earthquake, and the aftershocks were worse because the we're so all these systems are so interconnected, and at a certain level they're kind of faulty. They're becoming less capable to respond to a accelerating pace in the world. New York Times and the US democracy, those kinds of there's this idea of like the blue church, which is you have sort of an director at the top that sends information, broadcasts information down, and controls the system. That's like this blue church idea Jordan Hall has come up with. And so this blue church ideology, I think, well, we've read The Sovereign Individual, and I think sort of the last 500 years is sort of a blue church reign, where you have large corporations, a lot of control, a lot of engineering, and a large nation state and all that stuff. And it seems like, so that the idea of the meta crisis is you have these like blue church type institutions, and they're becoming more and more unfit. First of all, simply as because things are happening faster, and those top down things can't think fast enough. They can't move fast enough. Even if they were even if you could say that they weren't degrading, they're getting comparatively slower because everything else is getting faster, and there is a limit to how fast they can act. And then I think on top of that, they are also degrading. I think it's almost like a feedback loop. And so I think we will look back, and it feels like the coronavirus shocked everything, and it broke enough to where more is going to keep breaking, and it's going to start breaking faster and faster. I mean, this race stuff, that it's just, I heard about that yesterday, and I heard about it before yesterday, but yesterday was when it really all hit me, because we had this conversation. Race was knocking on the door. And then completely unrelated, I have a WhatsApp group with 3 close friends. We barely use it to talk, and yet suddenly a conversation exploded with 50 messages on how to even think about Black Lives Matter. And then they're like, we need to get on a call. This text conversation isn't even enough to figure it out. Nobody knows what's going on. So we're going to have a 4-way call at some point now. And so, yeah, I guess what the feeling I'm trying to express is that things are accelerating, and it's going to get more crazy and probably a bit dark. I don't know how dark, but it's like, you have the hero's journey, where every story follows the hero's journey. And part of the hero's journey is you go into the abyss, and it's scary as fuck. And even though maybe we could sort of say, a comforting thing to me when I'm feeling like I'm in an abyss is like, okay, well, this will probably help. I'll probably become out a bigger person. but that is of limited comfort in the chaos, because it's, and especially, you know, the deeper the abyss, sure, the bigger the reward, but it's a dark and scary place. And I feel like we're just, you know, tipping into it, and we're, you know, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So, and I think it's happening now. That's been a change for me in the past few weeks. You know, I as you know, and we've talked about this a lot, I work on cryptocurrency. And so in some sense, I've already thought a lot and kind of hoped for a big societal change, which I think cryptocurrency plays a big part in. So in a way, I was and am looking forward to this transition. But in the past few weeks, it stopped being like, that'll happen one day, and it started being, this is happening now. It's really beginning. And I don't know, maybe my sample size of who I talk to is biased. Well, okay, it certainly is. There's no other option. We can't get an unbiased sample size of your social network, or unbiased sample. But when I ask people, they agree that this feels, they either agree that yes, they really strongly believe this is the beginning of a huge shift, which also the sovereign individual suggests in its own way, or they agree that it feels pretty fucking significant. And oh, I have a guest calling me now. Well, let me just check the time. Let me pause the recording. Yeah, so just it seems like when I ask people honestly, because I'm trying to check whether I'm, you know, maybe delusional. Am I seeing this clearly? Because it's quite a big claim to say we are on the precipice of a change on the order of 500 years. That's sort of the sovereign individual's claim, is that if you look at the past few 500-year chunks, we've gone through a really big change. So to sit here and say that's happening now is quite a bold thing. Sorry, let me just open the gate for somebody. So what I try to do is I reach out to the people I know and say, are you getting this? Does it, you know, am I crazy here? Is this going crazy? And it seems people have varying degrees of saying, yeah, shit's going fucking crazy. And a lot of them say it's going to get crazier. So have you, okay, let me pause again, let somebody in, and then I just want to ask you one question before we close.
Sure.
Okay, cool, recording now. So yeah, I guess just before I go, I want to ask you, do you, because I know that you sort of agree with that idea. So let me rather ask, like, do you get the sense that the people around you feel that way?
That we're on the precipice of a huge change, or maybe just starting to tip over the edge.
Yeah.
I would say here in, you know, the sleepy little town of Clinton, Iowa, right on the Mississippi River, no, not at all. It's just business as usual. You know, the corn crop is coming up. You know, I'm working at a company that's spraying Roundup, you know, herbicides on the corn crop to keep weeds down and blah, blah, blah. And it's just life as, you know, it's just another growing season of getting that corn to come up. You
Mm.
know? And, you know, they had a little demonstration planned here for, you know, kind of on the race issue. Businesses around that park, they were going to have it at this one park, which is right next door to where I live. Businesses around there closed early in anticipation of, you know, looting and vandalism and all that stuff. Nothing like that happened. I did not participate. I didn't look at the demonstration. I don't know if it was a big turnout or not, but certainly no flames and explosions, nothing like that happened from it at all. It was almost a non-event from a news point of view.
Mm.
So I would say here, at least from the people that I'm talking to, it's like it's in a different world. You know, all this race tension is going on somewhere else. You know,
Mm.
and certainly, you know, the economy, you know, COVID-19, you know, is certainly an issue here. You know, we were locked down for a while. Iowa opened up, was starting to open up sooner than Illinois. Of course, right on the Mississippi, so we have this dual state environment here. You know, and of course, Illinois is a stepchild of Chicago. Well, Chicago is a big city, so the COVID-19 was, a different issue in Chicago than it was in the rest of the state. But the state has to do what Chicago does, and so Illinois stayed locked down longer, and so on and so on. Anyway, um, yeah, I would say if I spoke with other people around me here, like you and I speak, they would look at me like I'm crazy. What the hell am I talking about? Um, but you and I are reading books like The Sovereign Individual, and I just finished. I actually did just finish reading the A Brief History of Everything by Ken Wilber. And one of your last people that you spoke with mentioned Ken Wilber right in the middle of his thing. And I thought, oh, yeah, cool. He's on the same page. Anyway, but I would say both those two books are pointing in the same direction, that we are on the cusp of a very significant societal evolution. And, along with that could be revolution, to right some of the injustices that we have, gone along with for a long time. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I answered. I don't see that people here are on the same page as you and I. Not at all. It's just the sleepy Midwest, and the main course of business here is getting that corn crop planted, and it's coming up, and we got to babysit it with herbicides and pesticides, and that's what's going on. And so it's just another year. And as of course I knew it growing up. I grew up in this area, and the farmers are so indebted to their farming business. They have equipment and all the stuff that is financed through the bank. And the only way to survive it is to keep playing that game. They have to buy more seed. They have to plant it in the ground. They have to buy new planters and harvesters and all. And so there's no way out of that, so
emotionally in that.
well, they're emotionally, and they're just financially trapped. It's just like they've financed the operation, and the only way to pay for it is to keep doing it. They have to keep servicing the loan in banker terms. They have,
I wonder if there's like a larger metaphor there, of just being somehow indebted to our way of life. And oh yeah, it reminds me of addiction, especially with some of the rebel wisdom people are talking about it. It's like a kind of addiction, and that blinds you to certain things as well. Well, I have to run. I have my guests showing up here, and I don't want to leave them hanging, but
yeah.
yeah, this was cool. I really like how it went. I feel like we should do another call, maybe, and just talk about The Sovereign Individual. I think we could go into so much depth with that book in particular, and maybe even have my friend Tim join the call. I think we should do that. That could be really cool.
Yeah. I've got, and I'll let you go real quick, but I've got this Word document I can send you. It's just a bunch of talking points, an agenda of